Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Implementing Common Assessments Across Learning Environments Edcite Schools webinar. Let's dive right in. So, Edcite Schools is a platform that allows teams to give common assessments. That means that it's an assessment that you are sending across multiple classes, so multiple teachers are giving it to their students. You are using the same assessment across all of those classes. And on the back end, you are getting aggregate reports. So my principal, my department chair, my district administrators, they're all able to see that data coming in from the assessment. So on Edcite Schools, we talk a lot about common assessments and implementing those common assessments. And it usually looks something like this. There is a common set of content. So whether it's 5 questions, whether it's 15 questions, whether it is formative or it is summative, you have some kind of digital assessment that is being pushed across multiple classrooms. But, today and in this school year, common assessments are going to look a little different on many of our campuses and well, I guess not even on our campuses, but in our school contexts. And so instead of just looking like this, common assessments this year are going to look a bit more like this. So it's not just being sent to different campuses, but we've got students at home, we've got students in a blended approach, we've got students at school, but maybe a couple students having to miss class and be at a distance for 14 days. So when we're giving common assessments, it's no longer just about pushing an assessment across multiple physical classrooms. It's about pushing out an assessment to meet students wherever they are. And so on Edcite, there are 2 types of common assessments. There are district distributed common assessments, which really just means an administrator is scheduling that assessment. And there is teacher assigned, which means that anyone, whether it's a teacher, it's a department chair, it's an administrator, can share an assessment into a folder. And then any teacher with access to that folder can schedule that assessment themselves. So district distributions is a very top-down, scheduled for teachers approach, while teacher assigned is more of an invitation to give this common assessment. So when we're talking about common assessments in this new context for this upcoming school year, where we're not just looking at physical classrooms, but we're looking at these different models below, we're going to first focus on district distributed pathways. So let's dive a little deeper into the ways that we're going to have to reach students this school year. Whoops, go back there. So in our first school building over here, we've got students at school. So socially distanced, but they're in the building. In this school here, we've got students that are completely at home. This is a 100% virtual option. And over here, we've got what we're calling the blended learning or hybrid model, where you have students at home and students in the building, whether that's an A day and B day, whether it's certain hours of the day that students are coming. There is some combination of at-home and in-school learning. And even beyond these 3 models, there's going to be mixing and matching throughout the school year based on what's going on in our communities. So let's talk about how you give common assessments within each of these contexts. So we're going to start with the most simple, which is the pathway that your team has likely been using consistently up until now, which is the at-school common assessment. Since we're going to start with district distributions, we're going to focus on that administrator scheduled assessment pathway. When we're thinking about how we implement a district distribution at school, we can really think of this as 5 steps for the full assessments for learning cycle. The first step is around preparing content. So we want to make sure that we have either created or found the right assessment for our students. The next step is going to be creating that distribution and pushing it out to classes. The third step is going to be teachers providing the code to that test to their students. The fourth step being students take that assessment in class, back when we're, in those physical buildings. And then the final step is that we're responding to data. So let's dive into this in more detail. When thinking about preparing content in any situation of giving a common assessment on Edcite Schools, and right now we're thinking specifically at school. So for any assessment you give, you want to consider these following points. What tools are going to be needed for my students on this assessment? Are they going to need calculators? Do they need a periodic table, a reference sheet? Should I have text-to-speech turned on for all students or just a portion of students? So when you're building out that content, you can really think through what tools do my kids need. The next point you can think about is assessment security. Do I want students using a lockdown browser? Do I need to adjust time access windows? So maybe students can't access it outside of the 7 to 3 school day. Maybe I want to randomize the question order. And then finally, you want to think about question ownership. So one thing on Edcite is that when you create an assessment and you share it into the library, if someone decides to use your content, you still retain ownership of the individual questions, and therefore any changes you make flow through to the teams and teachers that have made copies of your assignment. Well, if I'm a district administrator and I'm about to give a benchmark test across my district and I'm using an assessment that another district shared into the library, I want to make sure that I cut ties with their content creator in terms of question ownership. That way, after I push out the assessment to students, I have the editing rights to each of those questions in case I need to adjust the question. So let's say that you need to adjust the rigor of a question, or you need to adjust an answer in a specific question. You want to make sure that you're able to use that pencil, make those adjustments, and have that ownership, so then it will fix the assessment even after students have started submitting it. So those are some of the content considerations that we are always thinking about. And we're talking about that at school common assessments workflow, but these are going to be things that you're going to want to consider in any common assessment flow. So once you find your content, let's say it's a diagnostic assessment created by the Edcite team, and I've got all the tools, all the assessment security settings that I want, and I own the questions in our middle school math content account. Once I've got that all prepped, I then create my distribution. So you create a distribution in your admin account. So when I say your admin account, I'm talking to all of you sub-administrators out there. When you log into your Edcite account, you have a teacher home and an admin home. Your teacher home is for finding content and creating content. Your admin home is for pushing out common assessments. So if I want to push out a distribution to all of my third grade English classes, from my admin account, I'm going to go into my content menu. I'm going to checkbox the assessment I want. I'm going to click to create a distribution. I'm going to name it whatever I want it to be named. And then I'm going to push it out to my classes. So we've got this GIF running a few times, and we'll go ahead and let it start at the beginning here. So under that content menu, I create distribution. I name it September assessment. I then assign classes. I can filter my classes, subject, grade level. I push it out. And now that assessment is ready to go for all of the students in those classes, accessible with that code. So we'll watch it one more time, but this is really the flow that as a sub-administrator, I'm going to use in order to push out that distribution across my classes. And even though we're talking first about common assessments at school, this step, this flow is going to be the same no matter where students are. I'm always going to create my distribution from that content menu in my district assignments page. I checkbox the assignment, I create a distribution, I assign to my classes. And that's it, ready. I can adjust my start time, my end time, I can add additional settings, but if I've already added the settings that I want to the assignment, I can just push this out. So then the next step, once I've scheduled this and kids can access this with the test code, well, the next step is for me to make sure my teachers know what that test code is. So a lot of times, if let's say we want to make this as low of a lift as possible for our teachers, we can, send a one-pager with the already scheduled assessments and the code. So this is a sample one-pager we've used with teams before that just goes over what assessments the administrator has pushed out, what the codes are, and how students easily access that assessment. If, let's say, you do not want to send teachers a one-pager and you don't want to email them the codes, you don't want them to be dependent on you for any of this information, teachers can find their common assessment codes within their Edcite account. So we try to make this the easiest pathway possible. So within Edcite Schools, once they log in, they're going to see their common assessments menu on the top of their screen. When they click into common assessments, they're going to see on the left, district distributed and teacher assigned. I know that we're looking at district distributed right now. So as long as I'm clicked into that folder, I can see whatever common assessments my administrator has pushed out to me. And I can access my test codes right within that page. There is no assign button for me as a teacher because this is already scheduled. At this point, my role is to proctor this assessment. When we're talking about common assessments at school, when students are physically in front of us, one of the big security measures on this is providing class-specific codes. So if I don't want students from first period to be able to share the test code with students in second period, I can checkbox show class code, and it's going to show me different codes for different class periods. So my section 1 will have a different code than my section 2. And if students from my section 2 class enter a class-specific code from section 1, it's going to tell them that they don't have access with that code. So just know that you have that choice between using class-specific codes, which are a little bit higher security, or universal default codes, which are going to work for any student who has been assigned to this assessment. So we've finalized our content. The administrators have pushed it out to all of the classes. Teachers have either reviewed their OnePager or they have logged into Edcite and gotten their test codes. Now, I, as a teacher at school, usually would post my code up on the whiteboard, or I might have code test cards for students that I'm handing out to them as they're walking into class. So that would be that at school implementation. And then once I've given students the code, they're able to log in to Edcite, whether they are logging in with Google, with Clever, with Microsoft. They're logging in and they can click, there's a Start Test button on their homepage, which is going to bring them to this Start Code option. You can also bring students directly to this Start Code to open page by going to edcite.com/start. So if, let's say, I was using Google Classroom, again, while students are at school, I could post into Google Classroom edcite.com/start and their class-specific test code. So when they came into class, they all go into the computer lab, they click on edcite.com/start, they are logged in with Google, they enter their test code, and they get started. And then while students are working on their assessments and as they are submitting, that data is immediately available to the teachers, to the administrators, to whoever should have access to that data. And so one of the nice things about the live progress report is that it helps administrators manage implementation. So if I am at school giving a common assessment and I have a window of 2 weeks that teachers can proctor this assessment, I can go in here to my live progress and see progress through the assessment by student. So I can actually see where each particular kid is. And by the way, this is all demo data, so there are no actual students in here. But more helpful from an administrator perspective is viewing the progress by class or by school. So I know who I need to follow up with and make sure that we're getting that assessment completed within the window specified. So this type of instant data isn't just happening while students are taking the assessment, it's also available afterwards immediately with item analysis, with standards analysis, with growth from their pre-test to their post-test. So all of that data is instantly available. We're not going to focus too much in diving into that data. There are different webinars and different sessions for that. We really want to focus on implementation, and the live progress report is very helpful regardless of whether I'm at school, at home, or a hybrid of the two. It's going to help me make sure that assessments are being done no matter where we are. So you can follow up with the correct people. So that is us, going through that flow of a district distribution at school. That's what many of you have been doing, year after year on Edcite Schools. Now, the next section we're going to look at is at-home common assessments through a district distribution. And while so much feels so different in terms of distance learning, how you actually push out common assessments while students are at home, those steps don't change that much. You're still going to prepare the content intentionally. You're still going to create that distribution with that test code. You're still going to make sure that teachers are providing codes to students. Students are still taking those assessments, and you're still responding to that live data, making sure that one, everyone that's supposed to take the assessment does, and 2, that afterwards we're analyzing and responding to students' needs. So rather than a process change, there are adjustments within each step that we want to make to better support students while they are all at home. So when we have students at home, there are really 3 buckets of adjustments and additional tools that we're going to want to consider. So the first bucket is going to be around measuring student learning and making sure that even when our students are at home, that we're not missing any of the student mastery. That sometimes there are ways that we can ask a kid a follow-up question while they're taking an assessment, or we can redirect the class that, we're not necessarily able to do while kids are at home. So making sure that we have options to fully understand their understanding of different skills is going to be essential. The next bucket is going to be around supporting kids and maintaining security. And then the final bucket will be around still giving students feedback and making sure that they're getting timely feedback and with the context that they need. So let's dive into that first bucket of measuring student learning and what adjustments we need to make when our kids are at home taking these common assessments. So, when kids are taking common assessments at school, and we've got them all in the computer lab, a lot of times we still have paper pencil with them. A lot of times you still collect scratch work at the end of the assessment, so you can refer back to it. If a student really misunderstood something and you want to try to understand where that misconception is. So one thing that the Edcite team has added, and this is not something that you have to turn on, this is something that by default is turned on for every single question. There is now a paperclip on every question type, and it is student facing. So when they click on the paperclip, they can take a picture of their scratch paper, of their written outline before they write their essay, of their drawing or their stop and jot. They're taking a picture of whatever paper they have and attaching it to that question. If, let's say, your devices don't have cameras on them, you can have students upload a file instead of taking a picture. So then, I can take a picture on my phone, maybe email it to my computer and then upload it. So this is really to help with some of that trying to understand the student thinking and making sure that we're able to truly capture everything and we're not too limited when we're at a distance. Besides attaching student work, actually, important to show you that you can, from the grading side, easily see that student work. So whenever you are in the grading interface, next to each student on that question, you'll see the paper clips and how many pictures they added. So if they had, 4 pages, maybe it's a high school math and there's tons and tons of scratch work. You can see all pages of the attachments to go through and try to better understand. And then maybe you add in remarks for students to go in and read afterwards. So besides attaching student work, there's also the option of having students explain how they solved an answer. So our new record audio question type, we think is going to be especially helpful for kids showing us their understanding at a distance. And so if I'm a little confused on a math process, when I go and I explain my steps verbally, you might catch my misconception in my verbal explanation, but maybe it may have been overlooked with just my scratch paper. So it's just another way for students to model their thinking and for you to really assess where they are at. This is also really helpful for some of our younger learners. If I If I'm a little concerned about, oh, are they going to know how to use these drag and drops and these different tech enhanced items? This is a very simple question type where they can click on the microphone to record, they can answer, they can do some speaking and listening questions. And what's nice is that I can turn on a setting to have the audio automatically playing when a student opens the question. So if I am an early learner and I open the question, my teacher's voice could be speaking directly to me. Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the sun, and then ask a question. And then the student could click on the microphone and add in their response. So the record audio question type is again trying to bridge that gap between students and teachers with their verbal answers and explanations. And then the last area for really making sure that we're allowing the broad range of answers and projects and things that we want students to show their learning with. The essay response question on Edcite allows for image, audio, video, PowerPoint, and PDF. So just because our students are learning at a distance does not mean that they can't have, a presentation where they take a video of themselves, they upload it into Edcite, and you are grading that on a rubric. And that can absolutely still be a common assessment. You know, uh, we had a lot of projects when I was a teacher that we gave as a common assessment because we're using a common rubric and it's a common prompt. So it's definitely something that when we're at home, Edcite Schools is going to allow you to facilitate that file upload and that grading and that standards tracking. So that's really all of the bucket of measuring student learning from at home. But let's talk about supporting kids and maintaining security. But most importantly, supporting kids while they're at home. So, if I am giving a common formative assessment, even though I am not necessarily helping students with their answers, I still want to be available to support kids during the assessment. There's a reason that, proctoring during an assessment is so important. And so, if let's say I wanted to make sure I was available to talk to students and to answer questions and to provide support, I could turn on the new RealTime Connect feature. And this is going to be really helpful when you have all of your kids at home. So I could turn on RealTime Connect, and when I open up that connection, this is the teacher here in the bottom corner, and they can see all of their students. And so what's cool is that I, as the teacher, can see and support all of my kids. I'm talking, they're all hearing me. But my students only see the content, the assessment that they're working on, and me, well, and themselves. But they're not seeing each other. And so, assessments are not group projects. We want to see what our students specifically know. So, being able to provide live video and audio feedback and support without opening it up for everyone to talk and see each other is really, really important. And so while students are working on the assessment, they can send chats to their teacher, they can flag the teacher for questions. I often think of it as, let's say we were giving a common formative assessment, and it is just something that me and the other seventh grade ELA teacher, we're just both going to give the same assessment, but it's going to be something where we are providing real-time intervention and redirecting kids and doing reteaching. So let's say that while students are working on this, I notice that one of my students is really struggling. I often say, like, maybe I'm walking around the classroom and I look at one of the students' pieces of paper. I notice that they were not getting the answers correct, I might kneel down next to them and start a direct discussion and ask them to walk me through their thinking. Well, if I notice here on the live progress that Rocky is really struggling with questions 1 through 5, I can click the call button to start a direct dialogue with that student, and it's going to automatically mute and pause me for the rest of the kids. And so, what's nice about this is it does try to capture that nuance that we have in person, where I can be walking around the classroom addressing everyone 1 second, and then kneeling down next to a student who needs a little extra support in another moment. And then I'm back up with everyone. So I can press that call button, I can talk with a specific student or a group of students. Edcite Schools lets you pull a group of kids. And then once I exit out, I'm back with everybody. I'm, virtually walking around the classroom again. Now that case I'm describing is really that formative setup where I have a student flagging the teacher or I see the student needs help and I'm providing that in real time from a distance. But let's say this is about maintaining security. A lot of teams have talked about the importance of being able to see students while they are taking higher stakes assessments. So if this is a this is a benchmark test, and it's really important that this is a secure assessment. Teams can proctor with video while using the lockdown secure browser. And so this allows you to make sure that students aren't necessarily getting help from their parents or from other loved ones, that they're not using their cell phone. So you can physically see them while they're taking the assessment, and you can use the lockdown browser. So we're going to switch from the RealTime Connect and talk more about the lockdown browser and the student focus tracker. So these would be things that you would use in conjunction with the RealTime Connect. So the lockdown browser is that kiosk mode that does not allow students to open additional windows. I can't open my calculator app. I can't go onto whatever tab I want to go and look at. I can't do any of that. I can't take screenshots. My browser is locked down. So when students are at home, if you want to push to all of the school devices the lockdown browser, on any assessment, you can require that the lockdown browser be used in order to access the assessment. And so students, when they open the assessment, they'll get a pop-up that will say, we're now closing all other windows, all other applications, everything else is shut down, and that Edcite assessment takes over the screen. So you consider that lockdown browser where I can't open other tabs in combination with the RealTime Connect really does offer a nice, well-rounded proctoring security solution. If, let's say, I do not have students using school devices and it's hard to get everyone to add the lockdown browser to their computer or device, you could instead use the student focus tracker. And the student focus tracker is going to give you a report at the end of the assessment on when students left the tab. Now, we can't tell you where they went, but we can tell you that they left question 2, or they left the Edcite tab when they were on question 2. They left it for 17 minutes. Or maybe they left question 3 for 14 minutes. Whatever their pathway was, you're going to see a report about that student on track, on task activity. So these are really the supporting and maintaining security aspects to really consider implementing when giving at-home common assessments. Now, the last thing we'll talk about in terms of at-home common assessments is student feedback. If these are common formative assessments or common summative assessments after all of the students have taken it, and I want students to see not only how they did, but what the correct answer is and why that is the correct answer. On any question, you are allowed to add a solution, and the solution will appear for students in their student report. So if, let's say, we're giving a unit test, I can turn off answer details while students are taking the test. So I go into the assignment settings, I turn off the student report feedback, but then maybe the next day after everyone has taken it, I turn the report feedback back on. So when students go and look at their submission, they're going to see, oh, okay, I got this question wrong. Oh, I think I made this too wide. And, I could either add a solution with me, the teacher, or a district coach, or someone uploading a video of themselves from their own computer explaining why the answer is the way it is, or why the answer is what it is. And maybe you just record yourself at the whiteboard and you go through what the answer should have been and how you solved it. In this example, we've put a Khan Academy video in here. You could approach solutions in a wide range of ways. A lot of ELA teachers will add an exemplar response. So, I could add a picture of just like my problem worked out and how it got to the answer. So there's a lot that I can do in the solutions, but it's definitely something to think about in terms of making sure students are getting actionable and constructive feedback when they're looking at how they've done on an assessment. This is critically important when kids are at home and making sure we're not creating a gap there. So, we really talked about the two extremes of like at school, where that is just your normal Edcite Schools common assessments experience that you've probably been doing for the last few years. We talked about important things to adjust and pay more attention to when students are at home. Now, when we talk about the third model of blended learning and common assessments in that blended environment, we're really going to be taking everything we talked about in those first two sections and applying both of them. But there's two additional things that we want to make sure teams know about. So those are going to be student group management and co-teachers. So when I'm talking about student group management, I'm talking about being able to view data, whether it's the live progress implementation or it's viewing data at the end of reports by group. If I have students that are coming on A days and students that are coming on B days, within the Edcite Schools account, I can create student groups. I can also then assign distributions to specific groups if they need to have different access time windows, if there need to be, different settings turned on based on where students are going to be and which group they're in. So student group management is going to be really important when you're thinking about that blended common assessments approach and being able to make sure that all of our students are having their needs met, even if they're in different learning groups. So if I start to look at my growth report and I notice that, on A days, our A-day group, we're seeing a ton of growth and there's something going on with our B days. And so then I might go and look at that and see like, well, how are we structuring that differently? So being able to pull data and to send assessments by groups of students, I definitely would recommend just adding that information if you do have distinct learning environment groups. And so if you have any additional questions about how to set that up, we're definitely able to help. You'd really be doing that from your district students page on the admin or sub-admin account. And the other thing we'll say is co-teachers on classes. So we have some teams that have talked about the fact that if they have, let's say, 3 or 4 students who have to self-isolate at home, but the rest of the students are in class, or maybe I have half my students at home, half my students in class, and I'm trying to run everything at the same time, you can add a co-teacher to monitor and do all of the RealTime Connect and direct feedback with students at home while the primary teacher is doing the in-class support. So co-teachers are definitely going to help just more hands on deck to support students wherever they are. And this was just a quick gift to show you that when managing that, you can do that from your rosters menu. You go to your district classes, you can click on a class, and you can add a co-teacher. If you're using something like Clever or one of the single sign-on nightly syncing apps, if you've got a co-teacher already added in your student information system, that is going to flow into Edcite, and you do not need to manually add that. This is more if, let's say, you don't have a co-teacher in your student information system, but you do have a teacher's aide who is going to be providing direct feedback in the RealTime Connect to the group of students signing on from home. So co-teachers is just a big thing to know about in terms of implementation. Now we've covered a lot. We've gone through common assessments, in these 3 different scenarios. We focused on that district distributed pathway primarily because it's going to be an easier lift for your teachers right now if you push out some content. If, let's say, your department chairs take the lead with some of those common assessments, or principals or district coaches, it's definitely easier on teachers when the administrator is scheduling some of that. But we also recognize that we do want our teachers assigning their own common assessments, and we want to make sure departments can do that themselves. So just to highlight, the only changes that you're really going to see from everything we talked about with that district distributed pathway to then a teacher assigned pathway is really steps 2 and 3. So you're still going to prepare that content. Whoever is building that content still needs to be cognizant of the tools, the security, the content. All of that still is the same, whether I'm doing a district distributed or a teacher assigned. Where it changes is that assessment, once it's prepared, needs to be locked. So there is a lock as common assessment. It needs to be locked and shared with your teachers. So if I want my teachers to give this diagnostic assessment, I need to lock it and share it into a folder that they have access to. So similar to Google Drive or OneDrive, it's a folder structure where if I'm authorized to see a specific folder, content that is shared into that folder becomes available to me. So once whoever is creating the assessment, whether it is my colleague, whether it is my department chair, whether it is my coach, whoever creates it, locks it, shares it into the folder, then I can see it, and I'm going to, from my common assessments page, assign it myself to students. And then steps 4 and 5 are the same. Students can log in and take that assessment. And then step 5 is, responding to data. In both teacher assigned and district distributed, your reports are going to be the same. You are still going to have live progress data available to teachers, school admins, district admins. You are still going to have the instant item analysis, standards analysis, growth reports. So all of those things are the same. The distinct differences are around sharing it with teachers and teachers pushing it out to students. But everything else we talked about in terms of the environments, in terms of adding RealTime Connect and encouraging students to attach, their scratch paper when they're at home. Those things are all the same, regardless of district distributed or teacher assigned. So just to kind of conclude here, common assessments are so powerful and really help us work together as a team to drive student growth. And we know that common assessments are going to look different than they ever have before, but we are here to help you. So final tips, just to, get you thinking about your next steps. If you would like help setting up accommodations at the admin level, get in touch with us so you can set those at the admin level, and it will follow that student to any assessment they give on Edcite. We're going to be doing another webinar this week specifically about accommodations and meeting the needs of all learners. But just make sure that if you want to, guarantee that every student that needs to have magnified text based on their IEP, that they're getting that magnified text, whether it's a science common formative assessment or it's a social studies unit test, you can set that accommodation in the admin account, and it's always going to be available for those students. If you would like to push out that secure browser to all of your district devices, you can get in touch with the Edcite team and we'll help walk you through that installation or that push out process. And then my final tip is that there is a lot of great content in the Edcite library. And so there is so much pressure on teams right now, and I recognize that, and we appreciate all that you're doing for kids. So if there's anything we can do to make your lives that bit easier, we want to. So on every teacher's homepage, there is a distance learning resources box. And if you click into there, you're going to see some units of curated, shorter formative assessments that you can use for, the 4 core subject areas with all of the different grade levels. So definitely feel free to check those out and lean on the library to help make this, not too heavy of a workload at the very start of the year. So I'll just leave us with the idea and the vision that Edcite Schools is always striving to positively impact students and education, and we do that through assessments for learning. We think that if you've got aligned assessments and actionable data, it's going to be good for kids. It's just this year more than ever, we have to make sure that all of that is true anywhere and with any learning environment. So as you guys are getting up and running, please feel free to reach out to schoolshelp@edcite.com for any additional support. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, and then anyone who has questions can ask them then. All right, thanks everybody.